What is the thing we don't talk about in your family?
My grandfather remarried a woman who almost immediately developed Alzheimer's and forgot who he is. He is now dating his first wife while his actual wife is confused who anyone is. He refuses to divorce because the scumbag family of his second wife bailed when they saw how expensive she was going to be, and my family had to get her care because she was too much for my grandfather to take care of. He is almost 90. I called out the relevant members of her family for bailing and was told I was being rude, which might be true, but I'm also fucking right.
We had a centralized vacuum system in my house growing up. Mom caught me laying next to it, with my pants down. That my parents died from AIDS in the early 90s when I was 2. Growing up I never knew how my mother died, and I was told my father just disappeared. I remember throwing a tantrum in middle school for wanting to know what really happened to my parents. My aunt finally told me the truth while more yelled at me about it. I remember crying alone in my room for hours. I'm pretty sure their death was the starting point for how strange my family is. Anyhow, my family hasn't mentioned it since then, and I'm now 27. As far as I know, we've never said the words HIV or AIDS aloud in my family. If it must be talked about, it's that disease, or something similar. My friends constantly wonder why I never mention my parents, and I still have hang-ups telling people how they passed away. It makes me feel so conflicted inside because I know I should have nothing to feel ashamed of, but my family and society makes me feel my parents' death should be swept under the rug. Edit, I want to make it clear we do talk about my mother. She isn't forgotten. Just her death and the exact cause is something that is avoided at all costs.
My sister's bio dad. We all know she's our half-sibling and that our dad isn't her dad, but we never talk about it. None of us know who he is or if he ever paid child support or if our sister knows him. Nothing. And I'm sure none of us will ever bring it up.
The fact that my uncle is very likely schizophrenic, but since he thinks the voices he hears are from heaven and the creatures he sees are from hell, we just say he's pious.
My grandfather's brother was a priest when he was younger. His wife of 40+ years used to be a nun. Their first child was born a few months after they left.
My wedding day. It was a 6-month marriage to an emotionally abusive woman that ended with infidelity, depression, and homelessness. I'm totally fine now, but I don't ever mention it. So no one else does. My grandpa has brought the wedding up a couple of times for necessary reasons, but refers to it as "that time we met you in the park."
Dad's second wife, a straight psycho who systematically poisoned every relationship he had until she was it, and the abuse we endured that she convinced him wasn't happening because we were all just acting out. Now he's dying and everyone's so weepy, but he was given 6 weeks to live 3.5 years ago, and was living symptom-free for most of that time. I can't mourn because I feel like he's dead to me because I was dead to him when I was 11. I already mourned.
When I was growing up, I always heard stories about my dad as a kid hanging out in his mom's tavern. The first time we visited his hometown, he showed us his house, which is on a crossroads and split level. Front door goes to the top floor, basement or lower floor opens out the back, which has a small road parking area, and that's where the tavern was. It wasn't until many years later that it dawned on me that my dad grew up during Prohibition. Grandma was a bootlegger. It gets better. His hometown is on a road that was considered a bootlegger's highway. From Canada, he went through jump school in the same class as Henry Hill, whose life Goodfellas was based on. One night in my teens, a friend of his, who I'd never heard of, knocked on the door at 10 p.m. He and his 2 buddies, all Italian, wanted a place to sleep for the night. They were gone in the morning. His pension and the work he did after he retired couldn't possibly explain our lifestyle. Mom has forbidden me from digging into it any further.
My uncle raped my mother for 9 years and no one in her family wanted to admit it. My mom noticed behaviors his daughter was displaying and mentioned it. No one believed her. He died. Turns out, he was raping his daughter too. I'm honestly disgusted with my family, and with her mother. Her mother knew the entire time it was happening, but instead of having him arrested, she didn't say anything until after he died, and then she blew up on the family.
That New Year's Eve when my mom tried to commit suicide by swallowing a BJNCH of antidepressive pills. For years everyone has acted like it didn't happen. She doesn't want to talk about it. Both she and I saw therapists for it.
A slightly happier story than most here. A few years ago, my sister and I reconnected after not seeing each other for 10 plus years. The split was due to our parents' divorce being an absolute shitstorm. Neither of us has any desire to reboot what wasn't our fight to begin with, so we just don't bring it up.
The fact that my cousin got kidnapped when he was a baby. Long story short, 2 young teenagers got knocked up, got married, aunt wanted a divorce but husband was abusive and manipulative, and she fled out of state back to us, her family. He followed her to try to talk it out, she let him inside to talk, he took my baby cousin who was sleeping in her arms, and fled out of state. Then he took her to court for abandoning her child and refused to let her see him. 20 years later, my cousin seeks us out and we all reconnect. Thanksgiving dinners are great, but we don't talk about that whole ordeal.
My sister pretended to be me when she got arrested. Joke's on her, she paid the fine, and when it was found they didn't follow proper procedure, they refunded the fine to me. Karma.
Apparently our dad had another kid about 8 years older than me. My mom blurted something about it after their divorce when she was pissed about something. It was along the lines of, if he thinks he can forget you exist like that other kid of his. She then turned very white and I was never able to get more out of her than that. My dad pretends he doesn't know what I'm talking about but has apparently told my brother a bit of the story and then backtracked and never talked about it again. So yeah, apparently I'm not the oldest. My grandfather was an alcoholic who used to beat the shit out of my grandma, and when my mother snuck out as a child to report it to the police, he beat the shit out of her too. Grandma managed to take the kids and get the fuck out of there. 30 years later, old Fekwad grandfather is dying and has explicitly cut my mother out of his will and left a considerable amount of money to her 2 brothers. Coincidentally, at the same time I'm born. So they named me after him, a literal monster. It worked, I guess, they got back in the will. So yeah, when people ask me how I got my name, I just make up some story about a poet or something, because the real reason kinda sucks.
Consider subscribing.